Hello, everybody. We're going to just give it a little bit of time for folks to get settled and admit some more people as they come in. But we're really excited to see y'all today, this afternoon, for our artist talk with Ken Paul Rosenthal. My name is C. Meyer. I'm the exhibitions director here at Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, Oregon. Current show is Ken Paul Rosenthal's video In Light In, and Ken's going to be speaking about the video and his process today. And we also have Chris Rauschenberg with us in conversation with Ken. And Chris is one of the original 5 founders of Blue Sky and board president and all-around cheerleader for photography. So we're really happy to have Chris joining us as well. Um, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but we will have about a 15-minute Q&A after the presentation. So you can hold on to your questions, or if you'd like to add them to the chat, go ahead. If you have any questions about Blue Sky in general, we're a nonprofit member-based photography gallery in Portland. You can find out more about us on our website and Instagram and socials, Facebook, and we do rotating shows monthly. So we're always changing stuff and welcoming new artists every month. So really thrilled to see so many people join us this afternoon. I'm going to just do a quick intro for Ken, and then I'm going to hand that off to Ken and Chris. So Ken Paul Rosenthal is an independent filmmaker and educator whose lyrical, character-driven documentaries explore the spectrum of difference. These stories of trauma and transformation are presented against a backdrop of urban and natural landscapes, archival social hygiene films, reauthored home videos, and animated text. Ken's work has screened widely at national and international film festivals and venues, including Rotterdam International Film Festival, Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival, DocuFest International Documentary Film Festival, American Documentary Film Festival, Documentary Edge Film Festival, Ann Arbor Film Festival, New York City, MoMA, the Guggenheim, among many others. He is the recipient of numerous film festival awards, a Kodak Cinematography Award, the Berkeley Film Foundation's Al Bendick Award, a University Film and Video Association Award, and a California Humanities Documentary Grant. Ken holds an MA in Creative and Interdisciplinary Arts, an MFA in Cinema Production, and has taught film production at Nanyang Polytechnic in Singapore, the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and San Francisco City College. And you can read more about Ken and his current project at Blue Sky on our website. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and welcome both Ken and Chris. Thank you both for being here today. Ken, you're in Northern California, I believe.
That's correct.
Great. All right. Well, take it away, you two. And yeah, again, thanks everyone for being here, and questions we'll do at the end. Thanks.
Thanks for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much to Blue Sky for hosting my film In Light In your current gallery installation. It's really an honor to be part of all this, and especially today, meeting with all you now to talk about the project. I want to open up by talking about the nature of archival footage, what that is, what is also frequently known as found footage, because it's something that we find. Found footage or archival footage, when it's recontextualized, is essentially taking film that was made for a different purpose up to decades ago and representing it in the present. Footage from any film essentially has more to say, embodies as much about the era in which it was made and originally produced than what the film itself is about. So when we recycle, when we recontextualize archival footage in the present day, this creates new meanings beyond the original message or story. Working with such footage is a form of what I like to call architectural archaeology, because we are actually sifting through the cinematic soil, as it were, and digging up fossilized remains from the past, but we're building something new. So hence it's architecture and it's also archaeology at once. But unlike digging up dinosaur bones, where we're trying to reconstruct something that looks like it once did, we are representing them in order to represent new meaning. So there's that way that the word represent could be used in two different ways: represent and represent, just like the footage itself has double, if not multiple meanings. We're excavating the past. We are literally mining the past in order to inform the present. It's a very, very powerful strategy that's being used increasingly in documentary films when it was formerly just an experimental strategy. So we're going to see 3 clips over the course of this chat. The first clip is going to run for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And to give yourself the most cinematic experience, I suggest you make your image on a full screen. And on a Mac, you can do that by going to the upper left-hand corner and clicking on the little green button. And then you can go to the upper right-hand corner in your Zoom window and choose the button. There are 4 little buttons there. The bluest one is the smallest one, and I'll get rid of all the little pictures of our lovely faces so you can just see my lovely film and nothing else. So I'll give you a second to get that set up. And we're going to adjust the sound at our end, but feel free to make more changes as you need at your end. And also, I suggest turning up the brightness on your screen to the maximum. Okay, so hopefully we're all ready to see that now. Why don't you run clip number 1, and this will be a 2-minute and 20-second clip.
Okay, I'm gonna play.
Okay, am I back?
Yes.
Okay, so I should have given perhaps an introduction to the film for those of you who didn't attend the gallery opening a few days ago. Excuse me. But it's a 12-minute documentary that only uses archival footage culled from social hygiene films and mental health hygiene films. These were ostensibly educational films that were made back in the 50s and 60s to tell people how they should lead their lives in terms of their social discourse between one another, what is considered proper decorum and etiquette, and also within oneself, how to take care of yourself. And it's really fascinating to reclaim that, to make a personal story. And that's what I want to talk about now, how my experience informed my process making the film. And I think this is really key when working with archival footage, because you want to grab what resonates with you based on your own lived experience. And that's what I did with this film. So I have some severe, severe childhood trauma, physical trauma in my childhood, domestically, that I live with every day of my life. It's an albatross around my heart and my soul and my spirit. And that allowed me to empathize more deeply with the footage. So I wasn't looking at it superficially. As you can see in the clip that we just watched, the trauma literally gets passed from person to person to person, almost like a baton in a track race. And I really tried to highlight that with physical gestures. The gesture of hands, as you can see, is both a tool of creativity and harm. And I did that very specifically because that's one of the things I've struggled with over the course of my adult life is self-harm. So there are a lot of ways in that footage and in the subsequent clips that we see where hands are highlighted. For example, when the fellow has his hand precariously balancing on a pointy pencil, or when someone's hitting with a hammer on a look like some sort of stool but falls down. So they're choices that were made not because I had an idea, but because it was deeply felt. There was something when I went through all this footage that just resonated with me and called to me. I didn't know what I was going to do with these images before I began editing them. All I did was cast a very, very broad net. I simply went on the Prelinger archives. I think they're also known as the Internet archives. And I just downloaded and I did a search, on mental health, social hygiene. I can't remember now. It's been too many years what my particular search items were, but I just gathered any images that just spoke to me, or frankly, some that, as you'll see in latter clips, just looked weird, that were surreal. It may not have had anything specifically to do with mental health or trauma, but it was presented in the context of a mental hygiene or social hygiene educational film. So I just trusted my instincts that some of my own lived experience as a survivor with trauma, childhood trauma, that would come through when I eventually pulled these images together. So with that said, let's go to the next clip. The next clip is shorter. It's 1 minute, 50 seconds. And again, if you can, try and optimize your screen so it's on the full view. Are we back? Are we back, C?
Yes.
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about in the wake of that clip was my process. What I'm doing here, what I would hope anyone does when they are working with found footage is that it's an act of interrogation. What I did was literally interrogate the footage for hidden clues and meanings in both content and form. So it's akin to being a good detective. You're turning over the rocks underneath the rocks that are underneath the rocks. It's really like there's a strata. It's really, again, like archaeology. You can't take for granted that the image you're looking at is just based on what you see on the surface. You got to think of it as like buried treasure, and you got to dive deep down and then organize them in a way in which new meanings are created. And again, that may sound like, well, oh, that's just editing. Yeah, of course. You put two images, one in one makes three. And it's much deeper and far more profound when you're working with archival footage, because there, again, it is of a certain era. So it's not just the image itself, but it's reflecting the era in which the meaning of the film was originally made. And you recontextualize it in the present and organize it in a way that works for you. So the way I organized all this media that I gathered was into folders based on emotions. So I had a folder called anger, another folder called despondency, and so on. And I put all the images into those folders that were labeled by emotions. And then I numbered those folders and put them in order to reflect the trajectory of the emotional arc from the beginning to the end of the film. Then I had the music, and I just simply followed the beats of the music. And as you can see, I was very, very specific and incisive about editing to the musical beats between the images as well as within the images. So for example, you see the person's head turning, the guy with the bandaged head, boom, boom, boom. Or at the very beginning of the clip, the windshield wipers, boom, boom, boom. And then even things that were so subtle, like when the fellow with the army helmet taps his finger, it goes doot, doot, doot. Whatever I could do to make it, I mean, it gives it a music video quality, but I got to say, one of my biggest peeves in documentary in general, whether it's experimental or whatever the subject or genre or type of documentary, is the over iteration of music. It's just awful. I just don't understand it. I'm not talking about dramatic music the way old films dramatize the emotions, the inner life of the character. I'm talking about because people are afraid of silence. So they have this crazy canned music that completely overwhelms the message or often even the person speaking. Now, why would I be saying that in regard to talking about this film where it's constant music throughout from beginning to end? Well, again, as you can see, I edited it so that the music is a character in itself. So it's working to actually draw you in and amplify subtleties that are happening inside the images themselves, not just between the images. So that was my process that I used for constructing the film. And as for the last clip, it's just for 30 seconds, and let's run that now. Okay, are we back? You're
Yes.
back? Okay. So I was part of the radical mental health movement for 14 years as I'd say a media advocate. I've made a total of 4 mental health themed documentaries. This was the second of them. And it was very, very important to me that there be that my work, that these films be informed by empathy. In other words, I didn't want to trigger the very people I was making these films for. And I think this last clip emphasizes and embodies that. There has to be a compassionate element. I wanted the audience to feel held by the film. So I always try and end the films on a sort of the sense of uplift, a transcendent note. So, the clip begins with the woman looking up at the moon. And one of my favorite cuts is the very next one to the fellow who's, wearing a baseball mitt like he's going to catch a fly ball, on the moon. All of a sudden, it's not a moon. There you go. Editing found footage. What was moon in one shot becomes something to be caught and held in your hands in the next shot. Then we have the whole idea of, seeing the light as the headlight comes closer. You have this motionless body floating in the pool in this liminal space. But then you have like these so-called hands of God coming down to lift this broken doll up. Then you have this Christ-like figure, a child with his hands outstretched like a crucified image, but rising back up. Then a child emerging from a cage, falling into the mother's arms, ascending the stairs, nodding his head with affirmation. It just is a way to sort of, again, I started out with anger and emotional volatility and slowly moved to a point where all those dark, rather violent images that kickstarted the film have now sort of been released and transposed to the end. So I guess my point here at the tail end of my chat or my opening comments is that there's great power in the image and there's great power in how you articulate your image, your own image, your own self-image via these other images. You'd think, well, that's not personal. Those are images of other people from another time. But again, if you work with the images in a way that resonates with your own lived experience, and then think about your audience and how it's going to land on them, then you can often take these difficult images, even if it's not about mental health. I mean, what's crazy about working with these images from another time is they reflect like a really sort of a darkness that was overshadowed by everything. They call them hygiene for a reason. They're kind of anesthetized. They're so clinically clean about how to behave and how to act. But underneath them, there's a darkness. But we can transform and transpose that for ourselves as makers, but also for our audience. And I think there's a lot of integrity and a lot of power in doing that. So, excuse me. So those are my comments. Those are our clips. I hope that was a good intro. And I'll leave it to Chris to moderate the discussion here. He may have some questions, and then I want to leave it open to all of you. And I just want to say, as I always used to say when I was going on tour with these films, that this is a safe space. I mean, I know it's being recorded, but we're here to listen with open hearts and minds to the things people wish to share. Maybe these images were triggering for you, and I hope that our discussion or provocative and evocative, and I hope our discussion is not just questions about, well, how did you do that, which I'm always happy as an artist to answer, but I'm really curious to know how this film and these images and some of the things I've talked about here resonate for you personally, and what kind of feelings they brought up for you. But Chris, why don't I let you take it from here?
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the things that I saw this film as there was a showing of a trilogy of films that this is the middle film of here at Cinema 21 here in Portland many years ago, and I found it very powerful, and I like the idea of showing it at the gallery. But I mean, these films, I remember this films like this, these sort of hygiene educational kind of films because I grew up in the 50s, so this is a time when these films were made for. And
Yeah.
I remember being very wooden and stupid. It's something that you would laugh at, say no to drugs, you can't, kind of foolishness. Um, and it was fascinating to me, you're sort of using yourself as a sort of human Geiger counter to find depth in these things that if you're just watching them straight through, I haven't watched the particular ones that you chose from, but the larger pool of them are laughable at best. And to me, it's fascinating. And the things that you've said about kind of technically how it worked by using the power of the music to kind of accentuate things. But I think it's also, I mean, as a photography gallery. We're used to people walking around using themselves as a Geiger counter in the real world to say, oh, there's something powerful happening over there that people are walking by and not seeing, and I'm going to focus on it. But I think it's interesting to be having that in the sphere not of visual art, but of emotional resonance. And maybe you could talk a little bit about going through these clips and kind of finding gold among the dross, or what that experience was.
Well, I think I already spoke to that a bit. I mean, like I said, it's my lived experience. If you gave the same set of images to five different people, they would make completely different films. You know, even if we didn't set it up even and say that these images were taken from social hygiene and mental hygiene films, just say, here's the footage, do whatever you want with it. Everyone would make completely different films. Um, I think I mentioned to you the other day that having not looked at this in many years, when I looked at it in preparation for this chat, I got very emotional. I got very teary. And obviously, as the maker, I've looked at it a million times over the years, especially when I first made it back in 2013. But it's been some time. So the fact that I still had such an emotional reaction to it is less a testament to my skill as a filmmaker and more it's just the way it speaks to my own experience as a survivor of a severe domestic childhood trauma. And yeah, that's essentially it. Just every shot was informed by that. But again, you know, like a film teacher of mine said many years ago that making a film is like raising a child or a garden. Sometimes you just have to walk away from it and let it grow. But I often feel like my films are parenting me. You know, they all of them, they know what they want to be, but they also reflect my experience of making them. They're intrinsic there. So that's part of why it gets so emotional, making them and watching them after the fact. Something in my current project that I finally have concretized in my mind that really makes so much sense for me is that when I make an edit, it's not just an edit that happens on the screen. I am joining, I am bringing into parity brokenness within myself. I'm editing pieces in me that are not in harmony. And there's this incredible enlivening. Sometimes I'll shout out in joy when I make a cut. And my partner from downstairs will say, what happened? Are you okay? I'm like, it's just such a euphoric feeling when I join that cut. And look, you know, I'm going to be forgotten one day. You know, maybe my website will live behind. You know, but at the ripe age of 62 and a half, I understand that I'm making my work as hopefully all of us will come in their own way to believe we make our work to become the best version of ourselves. In other words, we spend so much of our lives trying to achieve to make films that get recognition, maybe pad our resumes so we can get jobs or grants, or just to have some, you know, notion of success, and you know, our 15 minutes, if not more, be one of the greats. But at some point, when you start feeling your mortality, and you say, well, what essentially, what is the fundamental reason I do what I do? And I put so much of my time and resources into it. Well, of course, it's because of what it helps enliven my experience of being a human being. It brings me wholeness and healing and insight and integration. So you take that, which is part of making art in any medium. And again, for just the common citizen, whether or not you fancy yourself an artist, hopefully whatever one does in their life is about becoming the best version of themselves. But then as an artist making mental health themed films, and you're struggling with your own mental health for the every moment of your life, well, then it's really about you're working on yourself. It's really not about the film. The film is just the touchstone.
Yeah. Yeah, the when Deanne Arbus was Lisette Medel's student, she said to Lisette that that she needed to make her pictures very general because she wanted them to be about everybody. And Lisette said, "Well, no, then you have to make them very particular. If you want them to be about everybody, they have to be very particular." And I think I mean, there's many truths, but the two sort of deepest truths is that we're all the same and we're all different.
We
There's some
must,
more subtle truths in between that, but something that go ahead.
I'm sorry, let finish your thought.
Okay. So I feel like, the fact that you made something that was so resonant for yourself and for your own lived experience, and the people who watch it have different lived experiences, but you tap into something that has an emotional power and resonance, and our tuning forks resonate from yours, that we're tuned to the
Wow.
same note in many ways. We've all
Thank you.
experienced those categories of emotions that you sorted things into are emotions that we've all had and things that we've struggled with or enjoyed, or the full range of experience. But I think the fact that you're coming to this project saying, I'm going to use my own experience and things that are deeply resonant, and then this tools of my craft to maximize the resonance that has. I don't think it's something that's just for you. I think it's something that when you make something that works powerfully on you, it works powerfully on us too. And I know I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. I was very moved by that, and I was fascinated. I'll be fascinated to hear if other people have had the same experience with it. And of course, they've just seen little clips here, but for those of them who have been to the gallery and sat and watched it, it's early in the month, so maybe not so many have yet. But
So the essence of what you're saying, the key to it is to find the particular or sorry, to find the universal in the particular.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
only not only in your art, but this is something I really have learned to emphasize in my grant writing for my current film, because my current film is about a very marginal figure that no one would ever have heard of outside the Bay Area. But I feel very passionately about this project. How am I going to raise the funds for this feature documentary, my first, if I'm just talking about someone that no one's ever heard of, or even why should they care about them? The key was to draw out, to present this figure against her particulars, against a more universal, broader backdrop, so people could see themselves through this person's experience. And that's what I discovered, although I couldn't even articulate it as simply as I just did. But this is what I discovered when I made my first mental health documentary, Crooked Beauty, back in 2010. And by the way, that's the only one of my films that you can watch online, and it's free. If you just go to Vimeo, it's called Crooked Beauty. It's 30 minutes long. And I toured with that film for 3.5 years. And that's how I crossed paths with Chris up in Portland when I was traveling with it. But by tapping on the subject's lived experience in that film, it became a universal story. But it wasn't just me. I, as the director, really worked hard on finding universal qualities in the particulars of this person's experience. And I think this film does that as well. Should we open it up to questions? If you don't have any more questions for me, Chris, or should we open it up to questions for the people who are joining us here?
yes, I'd love to see what people are feeling from this. I mean, I found it very, very resonant, and I hope other people do too. And I'd be curious to hear. I mean, as you say, maybe people have technical questions, but also I think emotional questions and thoughts would be very good. Anybody?
Folks should be able to unmute themselves if they have a question, or if you want to use the raise hand feature in the React in your tools, you can do that as well, so we can call on you. Also, feel free to put your question in the chat if you want to do that.
I'm
I see it.
curious. I'm curious if there's anyone who's watching, if there was a particular image or a particular point in the film that touched on your own experience. And don't feel free. I mean, feel free to not be, get real personal and graphic about what that may have been. But if there was a particular moment that resonated with you, that would be wonderful to share.
Mm. Hi, I'm Yu Yang. So there was a one sequence, I think it was in the first clip where the little boy was being spanked by, assumed, their parents, and that has been my experience growing up. So that I just personally I really relate to that.
Yeah, and I feel I maybe went a little quickly in my introductions, but you just remind me of how in the very first clip we saw again the way, the father hits the child pushes the food away, or the child hits the dog. Then it comes back to the mother, and then the mother's pushed away by this fistful of dollars. Um, Food was a big way for me to push my parents away. I was always very, very slender, if not unusually skinny growing up, but I wouldn't eat, which developed a kind of, habit of keeping myself from eating. That's a whole nother story, but it was partially a way to punish is a little strong word, punish my mother, but definitely to push her away, because food is such a nurturing aspect of growing up, and to deny that sustenance was to deny her affection, but it was also a way to deny myself something. And the way that became calcified in my life is, something that I struggled with for many, many years. But again, this sort of baton, this way of oppression being passed from person to person. The hitting is not just about being hit. We take that on and then we pass it on. I would hit my brother, and it just is very cyclical and insidious. So I tried to articulate that in that first clip that you can see.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that kind of like a baton, kind of like a passing down that like family trauma and violence. I definitely have experienced um have exhibited more violent acts towards like my friend when I was very young, because I was very much I had a lot of a very unpleasant dynamic with my father. So like what you put together in the film like very powerfully showcase that. And yeah, and as you were talking about food, and that was also another big part of my personal upbringing, as having a really bad relationship with food, and that is also associated with my less ideal dynamic with my father. So I just all that's to say, I think that clip is very powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very therapeutic on both sides of the screen, when you rework these images, because again, we're reworking parts of ourselves. And let me say, on get a little positive here, uplift, empathy, is that the really exciting thing about being an adult is that we get to work on being the best version of ourselves. And part of that comes not just in our own heads, but interpersonally. So since trauma is something that can be perpetrated on us by another individual in our youth, it can be inherited from generations back. Then the societal trauma. There's so many kinds of trauma, but a lot of times we think about just what's in our heads. That trauma is something from the neck up, it's this biochemical knot. Well, there's a social aspect, and you can heal it by conversations like this, or just by being the person you want to be out in the world. So that's where a lot of my own healing has come, because it's like, well, I don't have to be that person who suffered these indignities in my youth. It's not as easy as just saying that. It takes work. And the onus is on us as adults to decide, well, where do we want that in a therapeutic context? Do we want to do it with our artwork? Do we want to do it in service? I got to say that I feel honestly, looking back at the arc of my life, that 99% of my healing has been in service to others. It's about getting over myself by getting out of myself. And that's really where this work has taken me, because the conversations we have after showing the film has been an incredible discourse. It's been very healing in having those conversations. But it doesn't have to just be conversations around mental health, after a screening, or like we're doing here. You can just be out in the world doing service, practicing right action, right speech, small acts of compassion, all these ways of being in the world that are not the person that we felt we were, that was stamped into us as a person, who was damaged and diseased. What about our capacity for change, for empathy, for transposing our traumas into something that is generative rather than destructive? We have that capacity. And in this, world we live in today, where it feels there's more chaos than ever, be it environmental, political, whatever, we always fundamentally, the core of being a human being is that we are all creative beings and we all have the capacity to regenerate. To use the unfortunate metaphor of a forest fire, nature doesn't self-pathologize. When that forest burns down, the seeds start coming up right through the soil. If you live in an urban space, you can see the grass coming up through the cracks, breaking through the sidewalk. And I think those metaphors are really important for us moving forward through our life.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Pedro. Do you focus on certain areas of yourself or pain while editing?
Wow, that's a very potent question. My mind's going in 50 places at once. I feel it's kind of self-evident. Like, again, with this film, let's say, I didn't have a goal in mind. I had no script. This film was made in conversation with the footage. Like I said, the film parented me. It knew what it wanted to be. I was just the shepherd. So, it's not like I have an agenda. Obviously, based on what I've been sharing with you about my own lived experience, sure, I'm the outcome of my experience, but it's not like I have it as a script in front of me that dictates where I go. I'm still an artist. I think whether it's as a human being or an artist, your greatest tool is your sense of curiosity. So it gets back to that word I used in the beginning, interrogation. What will this footage offer me? I gathered the footage based on my lived experience. Something spoke to me that I may not know what it had to say, but I was curious about the footage. Then I organized the footage and then into these folders. Then I numbered the folders. And then it was just about, I've got the music in the timeline. What image fits emotionally where I am in the course of the exposition of the film? But what is the music saying? If the music's going dot dot dot, then maybe I need an image that goes dot dot dot. It's a conversation. It's I'm giving as much to it as it's giving me. And frankly, I like my films, the finished films, to be that way too for the audience. As you'll see if you watch Crooked Beauty, the film that's on Vimeo, my first mental health documentary, it really works like radio because you only see the subject of the film at the very, very beginning, just so you have an anchor, so you know who the film's referring to. But that's only the first 30 seconds. For the rest of the film, we see images from urban and natural landscapes that embody the inner landscapes of the voiceover. So it's like radio in that you create images, in your mind, in between the source and yourself. It's, again, a dialogue. It's a dynamic. A lot of documentaries are very, very insistent. They come at you. They polemicize. They are so focused on an agenda. They tell you what to think and how to feel. I'm trying to create a space where the audience can meet the images halfway. Again, compassion, empathy. I want the films with these potentially triggering subject matter to hold the audience. I mean, there's so much violence in film, whether it's a documentary or it's fiction. And, I just feel there's, I've always believed there's far more beauty and poetry in the world than there is violence and chaos. But that's not what the mainstream media will report. And we get drunk on that and we get addicted to it. But I think we need to make our own alternatives to that, that frankly, I think better reflect human experience, which is, again, the creativity that's manifest in generative acts of kindness and compassion. You know, in my, if you asked me if I had written my bio in my 20s, and you asked me how I'd feel about putting in a line about making films that enrich the world with kindness and compassion, I would have thought that was very esoteric and woo-woo. I couldn't feel more strongly about that now. I've recently added that line into my bio. I want my films to be about kindness and compassion, or not to be about that in terms of the subject, but to in but to have that effect on the viewer, because we need that. We have the capacity to do that. We all do. But ostensibly, I think a lot of people feel their lives are devoid of kindness and compassion because of they're drunk on what streaming platforms, television, and the major media, and a lot of our politicians spoon feed us as a means to articulating power or taking power. But as Patti Smith says, and a million other singers, I'm sure, people have the power.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me is that if you were to make a definition of photography as looking at the world through somebody else's eyes, that's also a definition of empathy. I think photography and film have built into them a sort of empathy in their core that is certainly achieved. I mean, I read novels and I find myself in the head of somebody else, but that takes a great amount of skill from the writer. That's not intrinsic to the medium in the way that I think it is with photography and film. And I think, that's for better or worse. I mean, I had the experience now many years ago. I was walking down the street in New York and I saw two people engaged in a real fist fight. They were really trying to fight each other. They weren't fooling around. And I stopped because I went, this is simultaneously something that I've never seen before and something that I've seen a million times in film and TV. And I mean, what you're talking about is sort of the disconnect there of what we get in the media and what's real. And I think that's one of the things that's powerful about your film is that it takes something that comes from the unreal side of film and moves it over to the real um, connection of what's in our hearts, souls, and our individual damages that we've taken on, and also things that we've achieved, from having positive experiences. So.
We're running down to our last 10 minutes, and we still got time, of course, to entertain more questions. But a really seminal point that I want to make, leaping off of what Chris just said, is that whether or not you are a filmmaker or an artist, going back to my opening comments, I think the onus is on each of us to interrogate ourselves the same way one would interrogate this footage. This you can say that a lot of the issues we've been talking about in regards to working with these educational films as a source for making a film can also be a touchstone for how we can work on our own lives. We need to dig through the strata, recycle memories and images within our own mind, and transpose them, harness them so that they serve us rather than us being oppressed by them. We all have that capacity, and that's what's so exciting about working with archival footage or just watching it. A lot of times what I love about just being a citizen on the planet, loving culture, and experiencing any medium, whether it's film or photography or poetry reading or dance, is that it enlivens my experience of being a human being. It becomes a touchstone for me to look within myself. And if it's a really powerful, I mean, the litmus test for me for a really successful piece of art, regardless of the medium, is that I feel larger than the limits of my flesh. of my skin. I go out into the world and I'm no longer in the theater of my mind, but I just feel connected to something much greater than myself, greater than even connected to other people's, just connected to the source, however you may define that. And that's what's so fundamental about art. It intrinsically, all art has that capacity to enlarge your experience of being a solitary human being on the planet. And we need, again, to look into ourselves as fundamentally creative beings and see, well, how can I recycle aspects of myself so that we are our own art project, and that when we go out of our bedroom, out of our homes and into the world, we feel connected to something much larger because we're unburdened by these psychological shackles that have often been chained to us since our very earliest memories.
So we've got a hand up and we have a question in the chat. We'll go ahead with Alfred with the hand up for just make sure you unmute yourself to speak.
And then Sanat too.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hey,
Okay,
Al.
great. Yeah, hi. Yeah, I really thought it was interesting how, most film and filmmaking is about creating this experience that's immersive. So the sounds and the dialogue and the music and all that kind of direct everybody to, a certain story or feeling. And so by having these, in a sense, silent images put set to music, I thought was really powerful. It creates kind of a reflective space. And it especially hit me where, and I think it was a child and he had a gun in this yard. Is that what I was seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that part just really
Yeah.
became very powerful. And I think because of the out of whatever the context it originally was playing in was removed, and we were sort of seeing it in a silent way. It created sort of almost like a bigger meaning, like you said, like sort of the meaning became, if we don't take care of our mental health as a society, as a people, as individuals, this is what it turns into. And also just seemed really interesting too as an image. It was kind of shocking, like, wow, back in the 60s, there was an image of a child pulling a gun out.
Yeah. The particular becomes a meta. It's so fascinating looking at that today, where we unfortunately live in a culture where there are ever increasing shootings in schools. And when I made this back in 2013, of course, there were school shootings. It's really fascinating the way archival images work that way. With each new generation, it's going to be recontextualized differently and reflect the current mores, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Sanat, did you have something?
Hello. Dear Ken, I watched the full film. Thanks so much for your great work and as usual. And I want to send my appreciation first. Then I will tell you what triggered me. I will give a detail about it, and I will pose you a little question. My appreciation is that in such videos, in such educational videos, also in Turkey, I'm calling from Istanbul. There is this void, there is this fakeness, the pretentious acting in those films when they are trying to teach people how to act, what to do. But you took those void messages and you beautifully transformed them into a revolving series of questions. Because the facial expressions of those people, children trying to act that role, really became questions, and I felt really amazed by that, and it really enlarges our experience. We are revolving around different perspectives. I am the child, then I'm the doctor, then I'm the mother, and because sometimes when we feel like kind of different from the others, we think we are bad because first we look at ourselves from these unknown others' eyes. And so you made us revolve around that. What triggered me is very interesting. It is not something about my personal experience, but I'm the sister of an autistic child who is neurodivergent and also mentally retarded. In our family, in our citrus family, there was not too much trouble about it because my parents were really careful about what they were doing to when bringing up my brother. But we've seen many cases where neurodivergent children were treated very similarly to those scenes I've seen in those archive footages, and it really hurt me to remember those scenes because I also witnessed them. I witnessed them in public buses and how afraid the parents are, and they are, believe me, acting almost the same way, and that triggered me. And my question finally is that how would you think of this film without the presence of music? Would you would you try the same thing without music, or was music quintessential for
Yeah.
this? Thank
There's
you.
really good questions on it. It was quintessential. The music was put in the timeline first. I've never made a film so quickly in my life. The whole film from beginning to end was 2 weeks. The gathering of the images, the organizing of the images into emotional folders, and in the timeline, in my editing platform, the music went. No cutting on the music. It's just the single thread that stitched together all these individual images. So the music was absolutely essential, and I could not see this film without the music at all. It would not work the same way.
Did you commission the music, or was it
No,
already existing?
it was done. It was
It
Zoe
was done.
Keating, the cellist, brilliant musician. I strongly suggest you look her up. And I just requested the songs, and she very kindly donated them.
Thank you so much, really.
Thanks, Sanat. I think
So I have a question. Well, it looks like let's hear from Audrey Daniel, and then I have something. Audrey.
Hi, hi, Ken.
Hey,
Um,
Audrey.
uh, so this is a question, you know, I had never seen this film or this series of films before. So I was very moved and affected by a lot of the imagery, experienced different things like that. And but where I came into your work was with Crooked Beauty. So it's really fascinating for me to see what where you started with the archival footage, and then how did you then decide to take it to something like Crooked Beauty, where it's incredibly powerful film. I mean, that film just riveted me, and I recommend that everybody watch it. In a
Crooked
certain
Beauty.
way. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Audrey.
And then kind of, you know, that imagery is very photographic. It's a lot of kind of still but moving images. And then going into the film you're doing now, which is more documentary style. I'm just curious about how you've continued your imagery as an artist, as an image maker.
Well, first of all, I think you got the order backwards. Crooked Beauty was the first one. It's the first, not only my first documentary, it's my first mental health documentary. So it's telling someone else's story. So, this is the In Light In is the second film in the trilogy. So after spending 5 years working with someone else's story, I wanted to make something that was more, again, finding the particular in the universal. So that's why I wanted to recycle these archival images. And then the third film in the trilogy is Foreshadows, and that's the one where I tell my story. And what I did for that was recycle home movies that were shot of me for the first 5 years of my life. So each one has a different facet. And, I remember after I finished making Crooked Beauty that someone said, what are you doing for your next film? And I told them, they said, well, why would you do that? Crooked Beauty was so successful. Why don't you make another one just like it? Which is, you know, who wants to repeat themselves? You often have to respond, I think, as an artist. And again, I keep on saying as an artist, but also as a human being, because I think they're interdependent, whether or not you fancy yourself as an artist. So I'm speaking for all people, but we have to say where are your radio antennas pointed? What are you being called to do? As our experience of being a human being becomes increasingly virtual, we're getting so lost in our screens. We're not spending time within ourselves or between one another, or even more fundamentally, between ourselves and the extant animate world, which is the crucible in which all our sensitivities came to fruition. It's not the Matrix yet. We're not born in these like little test tubes, although we're moving in that direction metaphorically, and maybe actually one day. But for now, it's like your body is your greatest tool. So what direction are you pointing it so that your reception is drawing in the inspiration to point you in any one direction? So again, this trilogy, these three films, the one Crooked Beauty about a person's lived experience, then this film In Light In, using recycled educational films, and then the third one, Foreshadows, using images of home movies to tell my story. They are different facets that were not planned out, but it was like, well, what do I feel is the next step? What is calling me to tell the story with this particular aesthetic construction? And why not live your life that way, right? Because, it's all about being educated formally, then going to school and declaring what you're going to do for the rest of your life. That whole idea of declaring a major is so limited right there. I mean, I don't want to presuppose what people do or don't do with their lives, or what they should be interested in, or what they should study. But the idea that you've got this plan, this blueprint, this map at such a young age. Well, now at 62 and a half, looking back, I feel so grateful that I never had a career with a capital C, a 9-to-5 existence. So to have that freedom so that you can go where you feel called to go. This may sound like a little bit of a long-winded answer to what you're saying, but I really feel at the same time, I'm very much on point, because you're essentially asking, if I'm hearing you right, what were your choices to make one film after the next? And it really wasn't like I had a map. It was just about what I felt I had to do next. And I try and live my life that way too.
Okay. Oh, that's great. So what I was going to ask, as we've gotten to the end of our sort of allotted time here, is I know some of the people in this Zoom are not in Portland. I know Pedro is in the Dominican Republic. People are not able to come into the gallery and watch it. Crooked Beauty, they can watch, as you said, they can find it. Can we give them out of town people an opportunity if they text us or something? Can we let them in digitally?
There was a time when I had the trilogy available on DVD, and I sold those for about 5 years, and then the DVDs ran out, and then the things changed to streaming. And, I've just not made these films available online except for Crooked Beauty. I'm going to have to give it some thought. I think people should write to me individually if they're interested in seeing In Light In. Foreshadows, because it's so personal, it had a life that I'm no longer, that won't be available. But In Light In, given everyone's, generous attention today in this chat, I feel like it would be unfair to only show you these clips. If you write to me via my website, if you go to just kenpaulrosenthal.com, I'll see about giving you a password to watch it. And it'll just be, that password will be private and only up for a very short time. Okay, so you can at least watch that film. And Crooked Beauty, again, is in perpetuity available on Vimeo for free. Also, please check out my current film. You can see a trailer for that. It's called Julia Vinograd, Between Spirit and Stone. So the URL for that website is Between Spirit and Stone, the film.com. Between Spirit and Stone, the film.com. And you can see what my current project is about. So hopefully that will be done in a year or two. I think that's about it for our time. I really want to thank everyone from around the world for joining us today. It's really, really been a pleasure to speak to you. I hope it was meaningful and inspiring for you. And I look forward to hearing from you if you want to contact me through my website, kenpaulrosenthal.com.